Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of the Album Club. We're on Heavy Metallurgy. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you. And we're down a guy. Logan is on his way to Chicago, if he's not there already, to hang out with Rick and Chris, who has the Depeche Commode channel, and we're going to be doing some record shopping and hanging out. So sounds like a good time. And before we get into it, just want to say rest in peace to Thomas Lindberg from At the Gates. We're going to be talking a bit about the Swedish scene today, and we really would be remiss if we didn't mention him because he was a key component to not only, what the scene was, but the growth of it. I mean, he was very connected in the early days to the underground and helped it proliferate throughout the Swedish land. So big loss. He was a super nice guy. I interviewed him once on the phone back in the day for Wormgear Zine. And you get the impression when you're talking to somebody on the phone that, they're trying to hurry along to get to their next interview. He felt like he was completely invested, super nice guy. He seemed to be actually interested to talk to you. It was a very, very cool exchange we had. And it's a bummer. Cancer sucks. Fuck cancer, all that stuff. But I just wanted to say, rest in peace. Our condolences to their friends and family, of course, which none of which are probably watching this. But anyway, it's good to be surrounded by these two fellas right here. Jim, what's been going on?
Yeah, man, definitely, saddened by the news of Thomas's passing, and this is really weird. I was listening to this record this weekend before it happened, so I mean, just a strange coincidence, but
yeah,
Slaughter Soul, man. Yeah, I know a lot of people are like, oh, this record spawned metalcore or whatever.
That's my favorite At the Gates record.
Mine too, man. I'm sorry, dude. It doesn't get any better than Blinded by Fear for me. That's one of my all-time favorite metal songs of any band. I absolutely love that. And Thomas' voice is on point. He's such a great front man. So definitely R.I.P. He will be missed. Great freaking record, essential. A different direction. Got a little Hammerheart in. Always good for the soul as well. Hearing some good old Bathory here, and name of Austin's brewery, of course, as well.
Mm-hmm.
And needed a little bit of healing, man, after all that bad news this week. A little bit of spiritual healing, if you will.
Yep.
Some say to forgive, guilty she should die.
Hell yeah. Well, it's good to see you. I see you purged a little of your Swedish listening with a little of some of the American sauce in there. So.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Kellen, good to see you as well. How you been? What's been going on?
Good. Yeah. Crazy. So like my At the Gate story is I was living abroad in South Korea, and there was a guy from Canada and a guy from Ireland. This is back at the 2014. So right before they sort of brought out At War with Reality, but they came and they played in Seoul, South Korea. So we got on a subway and bus, and we were living in the southern part of the country and drove across South Korea to go see At the Gates in 2014. But anyway, my first experience though with Thomas was actually not with At the Gates. So I came to appreciate his contribution to the Swedish death metal scene later, but it was actually with this band. So this is the second full length from Skit System, but this is kind of my first glimpse in terms of his contribution to Swedish extreme music in general. But that was my first, wanted to go back and pull a record that sort of reminded me of him in a probably different context than maybe what we're used to seeing on Heavy Metallurgy, but nonetheless, kind of a very important time period in my life when I was in high school. Listen to that.
Good band.
Yeah. This year, like this past week, I don't know. I would say for the most part in 2025, I've kind of been sort of like so on releases. It hasn't been sort of a great year necessarily for me, but it's kind of rounding out some heavy hitters for me coming are around this way. So there's news of a new Ruins record, which is always a favorite here on Album Club. I don't know when it's going to be released. Maybe the chat knows exactly, maybe end of this year. I'm hoping that band puts it out, but I haven't seen a release date for it. There's a new Evoken record that's going to come out next month. I'm super excited for. And there's a new Bluthaus Nord record. So all those bands are sort of dear to me, and I'm really hoping there's one single that's been released, but it kind of my first impression was it's a little bit of this record, Dialogue with the Stars, which is the second Memoria Vetusta, competes with The Work Which Transforms God is my favorite from the catalog. Totally different sounding records, totally different, but
yeah,
I absolutely love this, and
that's more traditional sounding black metal.
Is much more like in the hey, remember the Norwegian scene kind of thing. But obviously his own take on it. So love this record. And another one that comes out this Friday, I believe. Wasn't able to get to do a review for this, but there's a new Solicitor record in terms of this kind of a speed metal out of Seattle. But this is their first one, Spectral Devastation. New one out on Gates of Hell Records coming here that I believe we got a promo for that I've been spinning and enjoying. So their new one comes out at the end of this week, but pulled out their first one, kind of remind me from, I think, 2020, what they had going on. So that's what's been spinning around here.
All right. Ordered a few things that aren't here yet, but I did get this in finally. Lord Weird Sluffeg Traveler Supplement 1, the Ephemeral Glades. This is a EP, continuation of the Traveler concept and story. They revisited for one EP, and Alan and I did a collab review of this one here earlier in the year. Finally got a CD of it. I think the vinyl might have been sold out, but I had a few little minor gripes, I guess, but not enough to not have it. These guys are so good. My main complaint was some of the playing is a little, I don't want to say sloppy, just, look, they kind of unravel in a couple spots, but it's not like bad. It's just, it feels like they did it live, which completely in the songs, the riffs, it's really cool to revisit the Traveler, which many would say is the band's best album. I'm still weeding through this one here. Finally got a copy of it. I don't know if I've shown this yet, but Chasing the Dragon, the second full-length album from Helm's Deep, which is Scott John Gallagher from Raven doing some background vocals and bass work on here. And I listened to this and listened to him play, and there's a guy that just doesn't get the accolades he deserves. He rips. He's an amazing bass player. I'm listening to the first half of this record the other day, and I'm thinking, is he better than Steve Harris? Maybe. I mean, maybe a little bit different of a player, but just he has a sharper attack, I think. But this is a really good record. I think the first half of it I like a bit better than the second half. It kind of starts to get a bit long-winded at the end, but I'm still wading through it. First half of it rips, though. Great record. And thanks to Kellen's review, I snagged my copy of the Prescription Desolate Divine. This is just absolutely devastating death metal from Finland. The main guy's from the US, though, so it doesn't necessarily sound like polluted, dark, twisted Finnish. It's just polluted and dark in different ways. But this thing, I love the cover art. It's so good. Yeah. Such an awesome illustration. And there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of notes and layers and dark abysmal passages to ponder. So that's going to definitely be on my year-end list towards the end of the year. But tonight we're here to discuss. Jim picked the debut album 1993 on No Fashion Records, The Somberlain by Dissection. And for those of you that may not know who Dissection is, Dissection was a Swedish extreme metal band from Stromstad, formed in 1989 by guitarist, vocalist, and main songwriter Jon Nödtveidt and bassist Peter Palmdahl. Despite several lineup changes, Dissection released a Somberlain in 1993 and Storm of the Light Spain in 95 before splitting up in 97 due to Nödtveidt's imprisonment for complicity in the murder of Josef Medor. After his release, Nödtveidt reformed the band in 2004 with new members who he felt could, quote, stand behind and live up to the demands of Dissection's satanic concept. They released their third and final full-length album, Reinkaos, in April 2006 before disbanding that June. So yeah, Dissection, Somberlain, Kellen. I'm assuming this isn't your first time hearing this. Classic.
No. Yeah, I had not heard this one. Though I, would say, I would imagine I'm not the first person when anyone is recommending, someone to pick up this band for the first time. I don't know if Somberlain's the one that always gets the call.
Yeah.
So Storm of the Light Spain was definitely the first one I was recommended to check out back when I was getting into this stuff a while ago. And I was later that I got to Somberlain. I immediately liked it, though I would say out of all the different sort of extreme metal bands, and more specifically the sound from this time period, I don't gravitate towards this a lot. So I've listened to Storms of Light Bane just as sort of over the years. I've internalized that one, but like how often I reach for it, I don't do that very often. And then Somberlain, even less so. Obviously, Reinkaos is a story unto itself.
Hot garbage.
That's another story. But yeah, but like this world of Sacramentum, Dawn, things like that, I don't necessarily gravitate towards. So I had listened to this in a long time. And I was happy when Jim pulled it, just because I do think when people gravitate towards Dissection, it's going to be Storm. So to revisit this, I was enjoying it over the past week for sure.
Storm, it really isn't. It's a progression for sure, but it's not that. The Somberlain is really in
right.
It's not out of that far disconnected from
right. It's not that different. It's not like a dramatic step down. I will get into this later on, but yeah. I don't think if anyone were to have recommended this as my first Dissection record, it would not have deterred me from exploring the further catalog. For sure. I think that's kind of what we're driving at there.
Yeah. I'll let you go last, Jim, because you got the hot topic for tonight. And well, for me, I don't know. I must have read a review about this in Full Moon Productions, because this is still the same case from I bought it from Full Moon Productions, the mail order back in the day, the No Fashions copy of it. But God, just absolutely floored it again. Kellen kind of nailed it on the head there. Sacramentum, the Dawn influence, those three bands very much similar in the fact that they kind of straddle the line between melodic death metal and black metal. A lot of people say that Dissection is a black metal band. This is the whole is possessed thrash or death metal conversation. We have it all the time here. I don't know, but this blew me away. There's just a maturity here in the songwriting department that is, I think it surpasses people in their scene. Very similar, of course. You can tell by listening the opening minutes and the few melody lines that where this album was born and raised. You could tell it's a product of Sweden, especially in the early 90s. So yeah, just instantly a very special band. Couldn't wait to hear Storm of the Light Spain. Blown away, just blown away. But yeah, first impression was wow. Jim, you.
Yeah, I mean, much like a lot of us, I'm like Kellen. I heard, Storm of the Light Spain first. Still one of my all-time favorite death black, whatever you want to call it, albums just extreme metal albums from the 90s. Like it's one that I you know, Dissection is a, unlike Helen, I listen to Dissection a lot. That album's it just connects with me on so many levels. I love production. I love the guitar playing. It's amazing. The riff writing is just original. The vocals are great and just menacing. And you know, so going back, you know, because I'd heard Storm or License for It, I was prepared to really be disappointed with the Somberlain. So I was like, surely not, you know, the debut is going to be as good as this, you know, or even nearly as good. And I was pleasantly surprised the first time I heard the Somberlain. I felt, you know, just like you're saying, Marty, like it really, there isn't a lot of distance between these two. You know what I mean? You know, the production is better. There's a little bit more, you know, togetherness in the build of the songs on Storm of the Light's Bane. You know, the Somberlain is a little bit more raw, but not that much. Like, you know, it's still a really, really strong, really well put together record. And much like Storm, like it grabbed me from the beginning. Like, and I love everything about it. Nickel Lord's cover art. And you know, the bass sound, which, you know, a year before Transylvania Hunger, it has a very kind of mid-rangey distorted sound that reminds me of Transylvania Hunger, which is really cool. And you know, just everything about it, like, you know, the dual guitar work, you know, they don't always play the same thing at the same time, either riff wise or harmony lead wise, and that's sort of, you know, playing off of one another as musicians, as guitar players, always keeps me intrigued. And then you've got these like classical, you know, guitar interludes. It just it never lets up for me. And so yeah, I really like them almost the same amount. I mean, you know, a slight edge for me to Storm, but I really feel the Somberlain is just that strong. So I'm excited that we get to talk about it tonight and to, you know, give it a little bit more of give this album its due, you know, even if it ends up, we don't all share the same opinions. It's worthy of discussion. So, you know, topic wise tonight, I had to listen to a little bit of Reinkaos again. And man, in the same way that the Somberlain and Storm of the Light's Bane are so close together to me in quality, Reinkaos is light years at the bottom of the barrel for me. It is just, it's down tuned. It doesn't have that classical melodicism. Its composition is lazy. The cover is boring. I just, it is such a huge departure, you know, from these first two records. So, you know, Jon's criminal exploits aside, you know, I want to know, like, you know, does that third album discolor for you Dissections, you know, reputation overall? You know, does it impact it anyway, or does the strength of these first two records completely overcome the mess that was his bowing out of Reinkaos?
Kellen.
I mean, I'm going to wholeheartedly say, as much of a tragedy as that third record is, the first two are such triumphs. And almost probably, like, would say the starting point for this style, right? Like, I think that, so at this point, when we review records like this, they're almost unimpeachable. And their importance to not just a country, but to a genre, to a time period in history. I don't know how bad a third record would have to be to knock the first two off. Like, I mean, they tried. And
some people love it.
You know, sure. Like, everyone's going to have their opinions. That's fine. I think the third, however, Reinkaos is one that I'm sure varies. The amount of dissenting votes would probably overwhelm how many positive voices are, contrarian as they may be. Yeah, it doesn't discolor at all. I think what's really probably a greater challenge, though, um, is there's like a little bit of how do we contextualize, right? Like I think when the band does have a greater sort of runway, they're around for longer, they have a greater catalog, like understanding their historic significance sort of develops over the years. And I don't think Dissection is a band that's like that. And probably many of their peers are in the same way. I think you've a band, you know, you look at even Emperor, right? This is another black metal band. I know that's maybe not what we're going for, but they really have two classic records, in my opinion, right? And they've been able to stretch that into a long-standing sort of career, and I think their sort of lore has developed as a consequence. Dissection, for a variety of reasons, obviously, notwithstanding death, have not had that privilege. So even with such a short discography, I do wonder, in terms of your point about potentially having part of their history truncated, to your point, or limited. I do think that's probably a greater factor, is they didn't have sort of the longevity as a band to even sort of work with their two great classics.
Well, the history is obviously marred in the fact that he killed somebody.
Sure, but I think Emperor is another example of that, right?
Yeah,
where you can say,
true.
I'm just controversy is that within the band, but still they can be historically revisited and recontextualized to new generations. And I think Dissection, I don't know if they share that same sort of privilege, but anyway.
Great question. And does it take away from the strength of the first two? No, it doesn't, because those first two are so good. They're the type of album, there's so many layers and such a melodic fortitude about them that I've listened to both of them. I think Storm a bit more, but I listened to them so many millions of times, and I could put them on and still not be fatigued by the albums. There's just such a strong, it's just so powerful and atmospheric and triumphant and all that stuff. Well, other than the fact that Jon apparently lost his marbles somewhere along his path, I kind of look at Storm of the Light's Bane as one of those conundrum albums. Where do you do after this record? This record is kind of perfect in every way. I mean, to go the next step further, how do you better that? How do you go better than 10 out of 10? Lateral move, people are going to be like, oh, you know, it's not as good as whatever. So really, I look at Reinkaos as one of those resetting the playing field, essentially trying something different, because there's no way in hell you're gonna touch that what you did in your past again. So I think starting fresh was what he maybe had in mind here with Reinkaos moving forward. I heard it for the first time. It sounded like mall metal to me. The groovy chugga chugga riffs, shit going on in there. I did like that Starless Eon song and the instrumental on there. Those were a couple moments of dissection to me. The rest of the album, I didn't like how pronounced. I didn't like the production. It's just a fail. It's just a fail. But you know, people do like it. But moving forward, I found myself loving the history of Dissection musically, but mourning their future. If they were going to say he didn't do what he did and end up taking his own life, the next album that came out after Reinkaos, I had very little hope for it. So, what did you think about it, the whole thing, Jim?
First time I heard Reinkaos, I couldn't even believe it was the same band. It was stunningly bad. And honestly, I've never even made it all the way through it. I can't. I dislike that album that much. Like it's almost like Cherry Orchards to me in how terrible it is. It was just, I had no idea. I'm still completely confused to this day, like how you could go from Storm to that. And, you know, I can understand like resetting the playing field, but it was it was almost insulting to me because, like yourself, Marty, like I consider Storm of the Lights Bane a 10 out of 10. Like I mentioned earlier, like it's still in rotation with me. You know, it's one of those songs like I'm a YouTube music guy. I don't do Spotify, but it's one of those songs songs from that album always come up in my mega playlist or whatever the hell they call it, the thing that kind of keeps on going. And so yeah, when I don't get it. I still don't get it. I tried again this week, and again I didn't even make it as the first song. I was just like, I hate this. So it's what kind of got me thinking. I was like, well, does this besmirch the overall, again, putting aside Jon's murderous activities, obviously that is a little bit besmirching of reputation, but we're talking about music here only. And I had to wonder, like, because there have been bands where, oh man, it's like the first thing I think about is the crap that they put out in it. But I actually had to go with Kellen though. To me, like these first two records, and both of you really said it, and they're just on such a high plane for me. It's almost like I just kind of forget that Reinkaos is even there. Like I actively forget. Ignore it with all my strength, and just focus on what is to me, kind of genius musicianship. To take, great elements of melodic death metal, to take black metal, which was still second wave black metal was still very new then, only a few years old. And to do it in such like a very, very, high level way, just really great musicianship, but always done in service of the songs. It completely like washes away what could have came at what did come after. And, and maybe you're right, Marty, maybe that was the best they could have ever done. I mean, supposedly Jon himself killed himself because he felt like that there was nothing else he could do. And maybe he was right, but not that's a reason to off yourself. Maybe killing someone in cold blood is a reason to off yourself, but
yeah, a lot to live with.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, okay. So we're all aligned there. But I was definitely, worried, wondering what you guys thought and what the folks in the chat were thinking too, because to me, it's like I can't discuss those first two without at least like mentioning Reinkaos. And but looks like for the most part, we're on the same wavelength. So yeah.
Wade's got a good point here. He got out of jail and modernized, and really he, in the 90s, where the music was a bit more complex and a lot more going on, a lot more emotion in it. And you look at what happened to black metal bands like Satyricon, they're working with rock riffs and, doing, so really, what Dissection come back to do was kind of what was in step or in vogue for the times. So I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying that it's unfortunate. I mean, he spent a decade locked up. That's a lot of lost time. Maybe it would have been a different record if it came out 2 years after Storm of the Lights Bane. It's hard to say. He missed a big chunk of evolution in there, and it just felt like he jumped ahead somehow, and what he jumped into was already kind of old and tired, in my opinion anyway. But yeah, let's discuss the musicality and composition of the Somberlain. Kellen.
Okay, so for me, I guess I don't want this to be a full-on genre story, but I just think it's interesting, like the amount, like what black metal was trying to do at the time in terms of being counter sort of the trajectory that death metal was on in the early 90s. When I revisit this, and because it was initially pitched to me as a black metal band, but the overall riff writing to this, let's just take the opening track here. So when we get into Black Horizon, if the entire record sounded like the immediate first riff, I think that sort of description of them primarily being a black metal band would makes sense. But as the sort of song unfolds, the second one that arrives, I think, is the one that is the most distinct and probably shapes the entire course of the record. Meaning there's something about their sound, I think, in the way they're sort of phrasing everything that does feel like a much more closely related to what happened with like heavy metal to thrash to death metal. There's a certain like connection there where I don't feel it's kind of what black metal was doing in terms of swimming in the opposite direction and trying to be some sort of primitive and primordial in a way. For a first record, there's enough sophisticated riffcraft going on here where I feel that sort of death metal tag works better. There's other parts to this though that I think are super interesting. Like 100%, they're part of this sound does feel also like they're into just darker heavy metal. I think some of the riffs here feel like amazingly familiar, and that's where I'm kind of tying in this sort of heavy metal thrash thing for me. Yeah, there's probably like plenty of tremolo stuff, but I'm immediately connected to sort of like a certain kind of like hero worship. There's something triumphant about this record that feels very much like gives me emotionally, ties into something that is much more rooted in traditional heavy metal. And the other part of this that I think is really interesting is the slower passages in this. Also, melody ties in there, and it feels like, oh yeah, this is the same time that Catatonia is going on. Like, it's not a death doom band by any means. It's just their melodic qualities feel somber in a way that I don't connect to Swedish death metal or mellow death from Sweden at the time. So it's just an interesting sort of line that they walk as a consequence for me, being sure the craft here feels like connected to a little bit more of the death thrash thing. The melodic qualities, sure, are a little bit distinct, but also remind me of traditional heavy metal and also doom, which is a really interesting combination. And they kind of crafted out this sort of space for themselves. Just key moments over the tracks here that I think are probably worth mentioning. The chat's already been talking about the breakdown on Black Horizon. So I'll let the chat chime in, and Marty and Jim, if you want to talk about that moment, because that epic heavy metal scream and the whole sort of slower
done by Dan
with the
Swano.
acoustics, yeah, it's so cool. But the moment for me that I think is most captivating is the title track. Somewhere around 2.5 minutes into that, there's like a series Jim talked about the sort of dueling guitar work. I don't know how many guitars are tracked in this moment, but everything sort of becomes a little bit more melodic and clean. And there's a weird sort of open passage here that feels incredibly somber, melancholic, and they don't rush through it. It holds for a little bit, and I think it's a really interesting sort of melodic piece to this record. They don't explore it throughout the rest of the song. They don't even really go back to it, I think, over the course of the record. But I think within the context of an extreme metal listen, this passage is super cool and probably one of the few moments that really like captivates me during the course of this listen. There's other parts of this that I do feel like are less exceptional. It's cool that they sort of hallmark or flag this record. It paced relatively well, meaning these acoustic passages sort of stand as pillars for the rest of the tracks to sort of operate within. But I don't necessarily feel that all of them have these major standout moments as much as it's really just well crafted sort of riffs and they're enjoyable. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But they go up back to this doom stuff a couple of times. On the closer, I even think Dan Swano joins in for some key sort of punctuation.
Yeah, he's credited for keys as well on the album. Yep.
So they tap into a little bit more of the doom thing on the I guess technically second to last track. There's a cool little solo that arrives in the Cold Winds of Nowhere. Kind of a cool drum intro on Frozen, but the first two tracks I think have the most standout moments overall on the record. and also sort of develop sort of this melodic envelope that makes sort of the hallmark for the genre.
All right, Jim.
Yeah, it's appropriate that composition is the first topic that we discuss in regards to this record, because I think that's what Dissection is all about. Their songwriting skills are really, really high level. These guys are really great guitar players, but they also don't shred solos and stuff like that, even though you absolutely could. You can't play riffs like they do, or come up with perfectly phrased melody lines and dual harmony lines as they do, and not be able to shred. They just like restrain that and then use that skill set in service of the song, and getting riffs put together where they make sense. And I will agree with Kellen. My favorite two songs, and I have several on this record, are the first two tracks. But I don't agree that those are the only highlights of the record. Heaven's Damnation, man. There's like a crazy, weird, odd Black Sabbath-y sort of like riff bounce about 3 minutes into that. Like, it's really strange. It's like a high-end black, instead of playing like a low sounding note, it's like high and weird, but it has this kind of down weird thing going on that's not bluesy at all, but it kind of has that Sabbath bounce, like weird things like that, to somehow manage to keep it black metal, but to throw in like classic of the classic, kind of like rhythms that from the origins of metal. I hear what, and I completely agree with what Kellen's saying, that there's a lot of classic metal underneath all of this black and death metal scaffolding that surrounds it. And that certainly is the core. And I think they even said in like an interview a long time ago that they wanted to know, like basically make like Iron Maiden satanic or something like that. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but I know I read something like that. And in terms of that sort of like flow of the song and journey of the song, and melody lines with guitars always come together and bring you into their world of like these sad and dark, but yet like extremely powerful melody lines. Yeah, man, that journey and that melodicism, that is sort of a direct descendant of bands like Iron Maiden. Though playing back to back, of course, you wouldn't be able to hear it. You really have to pay attention to the record, and I think get multiple listens on it before you can hear the connecting dots there. But what really stands out to me overall in the album in terms of composition is the way that they perfectly fuse black metal, melodic death metal into something heavy metal. And just like I said, a tiny bit of thrash, but mainly it's like classic metal and black and death in a perfect way. I don't think it's ever been done as well as they've done it on these first two records. I don't think that combination of black and death, perfectly balanced. Where to this day, like Marty stated at the beginning of the night, like people still argue, like, are they black metal? Are they death metal? Even the archives, it's like, well, they're melodic black / melodic death metal. And the fact that over 30 years on, we're still arguing about what they are. To me, that's always a good sign of like a great metal band and a great metal album, is when we can't really fully pigeonhole what they are. But it's because they're so good at both, and they don't really lean completely in either way. And in that perfect balance, and which I think only comes through considered composition, when you're saying, no, this riff's too much over here, this riff's too much over there, let's play these other two riffs, let's put them together, let's make something unique. That takes effort, and that takes editing and concern about your craft, and it takes a trust with the other members of your band, that you guys sharing the same vision, and you want to create an overall sound that that stays consistent throughout the entirety of the album. And that's exactly what this band does, through the tempo shifts, through the melody lines, through the blistering, tremolo riffs, through the blast beats, it never stops being Dissection. It never stops being the Somberlain. It's not like, oh, well, here's this band or here's that band. It's more like there's so many different influences going on that it's hard to just pull one out. And so you end up just saying, well, this is just who they are. This is just Dissection, and it's groundbreaking. And for me, there are just many moments where, it just grows into something, really, really powerful. When we're getting to songs like, Mistress of the Bleeding Sorrow, that very doomy verse riff, and then the classical sounding, I'm sorry, not classical, the Rush sounding keyboards in the middle of that, just kind of, like, whoa, where did that come from? But it somehow still works and didn't like jar me out of like the Dissection realm, I love how, Dissection's a band that even their covers, to me, it's like when I look at the cover of the Somberlain and I look at Storm of the Lights playing, the purples and the grays and the blacks, like their music sounds like that. Their music, the covers sound like look like their music, and the music sounds like their covers, and as grammatically incorrect as all that is, I think it's true. Like I really feel like I'm entering their world, and for you to do that so exquisitely and not jarringly, like it just kind of your next thing you know, you're just in that realm when you've got your headphones on. It just really takes some serious musicianship, to be able to create that and to keep the listener in there for the entirety of the record. And that's what they do here for me.
Yeah, I agree with all that. For me, it's interesting. It seems like Dissection is a product of, really great superior musicianship. But I read something Swano said a while ago in some interview that during Storm of the Lights Bane, Jon kept wanting it to sound worse and worse and worse because he wanted it to be black metal. And really, yeah, there's some great musicianship in black metal. Don't get me wrong, especially in Norway and Sweden. I mean, but it just seems like Dissection was too far beyond that. They just, like you said, they've got the heavy metal influence there, and the guitar work especially, and the melody lines especially. They would dip into the black metal, and of course Jon's voice was the constant, the black metal anchor, more or less. But he had that Project the Black, and that Priests of Satan album is good. It's just kind of boring, kind of standard fare for what's going on at the time. And I just try to think, is this the desire he wanted for Dissection? It just wouldn't have worked. But getting back to the Somberlain, I listened to it, and to think that this is a band that evolved out of something called Rabbit's Carrot or whatever. The band was called something really stupid, something about rabbit and a carrot. But just the fact that the maturity level is so off the charts on here, and it's the fact that they're pulling from all these different influences within heavy metal and making something a product of its scene. I mean, sits very close connection to, of course, Sacramentum and Dawn, but it seemed like they had a leg up. I think Dissection had a bit more melodically advanced know-how and how to build a song with melody as the foundation. And even when they go a little faster, a little more maybe traditional black, and a couple of these songs like Black Horizons has moments of it, but Heaven's Damnation, one of my favorite songs on the album, it's still, they can't shake the melody. It's there. It's ever at the core of their sound. And when you're working from that tools, that batch of tools, you're always going to have a level that sounds a bit more advanced than maybe those around you, some of lesser bands. So I think the songwriting and composition on this is really strong. And if anything, I like it when the acoustic guitar enters the tracks, which it does once or twice on the album, but I kind of see the acoustic interludes as kind of, you know, like someone's like, I paid damn good money on lessons for this classical guitar. I'm going to do a couple tracks on here, whether you like it or not. Cause I think the feel of a couple of them feel a little too upbeat, a little too bouncy than for the album. They sit kind of weird on the album for me. So as far as, you know, the flow, that kind of erodes it a bit for me. But other than that, I just think the songwriting on here is top notch. Let's talk about the what are we at here? Production. Kellen.
Okay, so I do feel like last week I was pretty harsh on the production, so I have more kind things to say this time around. Yeah, I think it works really well. To your point about, you know, the album artwork, this is, you know, and Metal Neanderthal made a comment about how some of these records sound, you know, kind of melodic and sophisticated to some and scathing to others. The guitar rhythm work specifically does a great job towing the line. The melodies ring out clearly, and when it needs to sort of separate itself from overall, which to me feels like a pretty aggressive, wanting to be towards the scathing side of black metal sound. That line that they toe works super well. It doesn't sound heavy enough, chunky enough to me to sound like a death metal record, but it doesn't have like the searing top end, and far more like dexterity to the riff craft that I would associate, especially by 1993, for what a black metal record was. So like putting this up against, let's say, Under a Funeral Moon, like they're worlds apart in terms of guitar work. Yeah. I do think though the choices now, as we got two musicians here joining me, so I'll at least give you, like, I'm curious in the insights. The lead guitar tone, however, I think is kind of strange. Like, to me, I don't know if that's something a deliberate choice where they wanted to make the exact same sort of pedal and distortion they're using for the riff to also be the exact same voicing that you would do for a solo, or often if you're alternating that I would imagine you're choosing different sort of pedals, different guitars in a studio environment between solo work and rhythm work. But to me, it just feels like some of the solos here are just very, like, I don't sound great, I guess would be my criticism. So that's just from my outside. It's not like the actual playing is bad, but the sound of them feels to me like a bit too, like there's too much reverb or too extended. They echo instead of cut instead of that I would like to. So that'll be a criticism that I have.
It's here. They swam it in some atmosphere. You know, usually what you do, Jim, you boost for the lead and maybe have a little bit of reverb on there. They definitely, I heard the solos on here and I was like, it sounds like they're recorded in butter. They sound just so
right. It's kind of a little bit of a wash. It doesn't have sort of the clean. Yeah. Anyway, so, and that's a choice. That's a choice for me. I can feel Jim is staying in his seat because he wants to lunge out of his chair and choke me to death. But
Jim's not a solo guy. Jim is, believe it or not, Jim is not a solo guy.
Okay.
I'm not a solo guy, but I have much to say about what you just said.
Yeah.
Other probably interesting choice here is the drum sound. It has a very live drum sound to me. And I think that's a great sort of a quality you can find like throughout the 90s with the way that they're trying to voice a drum kit. The snare in particular is a very strong, but I think I like the rattle. Like there's a certain, when you hit a snare, it shouldn't just sound like it dies upon the first strike. You should get a little bit sort of a life inside of the drum. I enjoy that. It's just a little bit pronounced in the mix, I think, at times. So that'd be my one criticism. Give it or take. That's not like a bad thing or a good thing. It's just the strength of the sound on the mix. It feels a little bit strong at times for me. overall, I think the rest of this sounds awesome. It's rough when it needs to be. All the melody is there. I'll let Jim take, as opposed to cutting my head off with guitar solo conversation. I like the bass is also clearly heard on this. For such a great rhythm tone. There's enough sort of visibility into the deeper aspects of the mix that don't have the same sort of like front cutting edge to it. And that's not like it's a clean good bass, or it has like sort of like a obviously not like the proggy sort of bass tone as well. It sounds like it fits the rest of the mix. So nothing really outside of that to complain about with the production.
Jim.
Yeah, I the everything every individual instrument here, every like additional instrumentation as well, besides guitar, bass, and drums. You know, we're talking keys and such, and the sounds that they utilize for each of them contribute to the overall impact of this record as a whole. And so when we're talking about the leads in particular, that, you know, sort of like wash that they have, you know, where it cuts through, it's kind of got a rounded edge to the tone where it doesn't sharpen your ears. You know, we're not, you know, listening to, you know, the guy from Loudness Shred or anything, you know, which no disrespect. I love Loudness. But that is, you know, again, for me, when I listen to it, I hear it as a specific choice made to contribute to the overall atmosphere of the record, you know, to make sure that you stay in that purple void and hell, you know, and the whole time, you know, you're listening to the record. So to take that, you know, in the mix and like, you know, push it higher or harder up, or, you know, too far above like the maelstrom of all your other instruments is going on, is to take you out of, you know, the world that they have built for you, you know, while you're listening to it. So I love the guitar tone on this, and the choices around, you know, reverb and maybe some delay on the leads. And I like that it's subtle. It isn't that different from like the reverb and stuff and the gain that's on rhythm guitars. I like all that because it keeps you in that headspace. It keeps me in a very similar vibe all the way through. It's almost like, you know, besides standing in awe of the musicianship, which I do in every song on this record, you know, just the, you know, for me, like, you know, it's like, it's one of those records that like, I wish I could play that well, is what I think when I hear it.
Me too.
And yeah, and so not like that, but like, you know, the choices they made, you know, with the types of effects and stuff that they layered on top of it, are always done in service of the album as a whole. And not to say like, okay, you know, look at me here in this lead, or on this harmony line, or in this, you know, dual melody line that we're going to play together. It's just like, it's always in service to the overall impact of the song. So for me, I wouldn't change any of it. It is, you know, if I could play that well, this would be the kind of record I would love to make. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about, you know, the riffs and all that stuff. I am talking about the production, because, you know, the sort of like, you know, live, almost flat affect of the drums, the way that the vocals are screeching, where they're sort of in the middle of everything, and they don't, like, they're not on top of the music, they're in the middle of it. The way the bass is sort of ever present, you know, there's almost this like droning effect, even though there's so much going on, so many tempo changes, so many riff changes. Like overall, there's a sort of like mesmerizing effect of the record that carries you on throughout of it. And for me, you know, any tweak of the knob there, production wise, would completely dispel that wonderful purple foggy atmosphere that this record creates in my mind when I listen to it. It's and I don't just attribute that to, you know, Jon and company. You know, again, we got to give, Dan Swano some credit, man. He was able to say, this is what I'm hearing you guys do, and now I'm going to full impact that. Let's really create magic with a K here, and take you guys somewhere else. And it takes a producer that's just as talented as the guitar players in Dissection to accomplish that as a whole. So their vision here, to me, was right on point. And even though we've got bands today, or at least a band, Full Candra, looking at you, that really try to capture that, this great, magical fog-like atmosphere of incredible musicianship that Dissection is, it's just never quite the same for me. It just hits. It doesn't hit the same way. It doesn't pull me into this other realm the way it's like I want it to, because I want there to be I want there to be other bands and albums that create this specific kind of a vibe for me, but no one else really has. Sacramentum is way up there. You know what I mean? For this sort of same kind of a vibe. But other than that, no one else. But I just as much in terms of the guitar, bass, drums, and vocals, like I just as much attribute that to the production here. So for me, I wouldn't change anything. And this is going to sound like a crime. I just want to say I haven't heard Dawn, you guys, so I'm glad you guys are bringing them up, because now I got to check that out. So thank you for that.
All right. For me, the production, really what Jim said, it's 1993, done at Dan's studio, and there is a warmth to an organic sense to this album that doesn't feel completely digital, which, as we've moved on through the ages and metal, strives to modernize and make sense of fast paced frequencies. A lot of sterility has kind of entered, loudness and sterility has entered a lot of metal production. You hear a band around the same time that was kind of embracing that early on was Immortal. I was listening to, the Somberlain on Spotify, and then afterwards it populates with other songs, and Damned in Black came on there. The production was so shrill and modern and like kind of grating. The atmosphere at this point is gone. Well, thankfully, with the Somberlain, it like Jim said, it feels like you're in the middle of it, like this swirling. There's snow mixed with like Prince exploded, like purple haze or whatever. It's really kind of magical, and it's a magical time in Scandinavian black metal, melodic death metal. And the funny thing is, you hear the Somberlain, and then like a track from Storm of the Lightsbane will come on. It's this sound, but even better. They got it just absolutely perfect. This was the template, and then they completely stuck the landing on Storm of the Lightsbane. It just made everything better. It sounds richer, but yet not sounding completely lost in a digital wash. But I really can appreciate the fact that this feels very organic, and when those melody lines link up, there's dueling guitar lines, there's other stuff going on in the background. You can, if you can't really hear it exactly, you can still feel its presence. It adds to the overall impact of this album. And again, I wouldn't change the production. They did improve it on the next album, I think. But yeah, if this was a one and done situation, it's great. It's absolutely great. Let's talk about the least favorite songs, Kellen.
Yeah. So like I previously mentioned, I do think the two that I would steer people towards are the opening parts of this record. Black Horizon, it starts with everything that you'd kind of expect for a band that kind of looks this part. The Necrolord artwork, I mean, that definitely was steering me in a certain direction in terms of like what are I'm supposed to experience.
A different view of Abigail artwork.
Yeah, I was 100% with the horses and the chariot. Yeah. But it's so as that song develops though, and you get to that sort of kind of epic section at the heart of this, it just completely changes sort of the perception and the overall feel of this record. And the first time I heard him go for that scream, yeah, it just was unlike anything that I would sort of expect from a band that I assumed was going to be purely an extreme metal sort of screaming listen. Such a cool moment on this record, and it kind of sets the tone here. I talked about how the title track Somberlain, that melodic part, I think is really interesting and probably my favorite single moment on the entirety of the record. I think it shows a level of like sophistication in sort of guitar playing, and a melodic sensibility that's difficult to find in general in extreme metal. And the fact that they tap into that was sort of out abandoning the identity. We kind of talked a little bit about sort of the doomier aspects of this record. I do think Mistress of the Bleeding Sorrow, I mean, the title almost seems to give it away. But it has these sort of slower, and like, I think I might be overextending myself to call it sort of a doom influence, but just that level of like sorrow and melancholy is something that they're able to evoke, and it's something that I immediately gravitate towards that genre.
Yeah.
It's a sort of a complex way to introduce that without sort of completely committing to the dynamic. And the closer there is great. We already mentioned sort of the Swano prog rock key hit there that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, Jack was talking about Paradise Lost. I mentioned, Catatonia comes to mind for me.
Yep.
That same year, I believe, is when December Souls is released. So there's some other parts like, I do think in terms of a heavy metal guitar part, the solo that we get that does not sound like my production critical notes, but I do think is like a glimpse into, I don't want to say necessarily Maiden, but like Merciful Fate, maybe some just like darker heavy metal from the early 80s is 100% like in their ear. And there's a sort of extended passage in The Cold Winds of Nowhere that I think does a great job sort of bringing that to mind. So I guess the bad parts of this record, there's no poor tracks. There's nothing on this listen, if you kind of are committed to the sound, that are going to necessarily disappoint you. I do sort of stay committed to the idea that like revisiting this record, I did, multiple times, obviously prior to Album Club, and I caught myself having to start in the middle of it to kind of commit emotionally to the back end of the record in the same way that the first two tracks sort of locked me in for the first part of the listen. Meaning I wanted to commit the same level of attention, and give the back end of this record a fair shot. And because Black Horizon and the title track are sitting right at the front, they always ended up sort of swallowing up sort of my sort of fascination and praise. So I do think that'd be my one sort of critical moment here.
All right, Jim.
Yeah, favorite, least favorite. I mean, I do agree with Kellen, like I mentioned earlier, that Black Horizons and the Somberlain, are my favorites. They're just extremely powerful. There's so much going on in those songs. The depths of melodicism are all on display there. The killer, like classical guitar break, in Black Horizons, on acoustic, the choir vocals,
Yeah.
Dan's scream, which we've talked about kind of ad nauseum so far. All that is to be celebrated. The melodic counterpoint, behind the repeated refrain that comes in about the 2.5 minute mark on the Somberlain. It's just godly, with a lowercase g, black death metal, awesomeness. That said, even though I may not like A Land Forlorn, as much, to me, like it's like a W, because it jumps right back up there for me for Heaven's Damnation. I really love that song. It's a really crushing black metal riff to start with. You know, when the vocals come in on the verse, you know, I think it's really powerful there, and it has that crazy bounce to it I was talking about earlier. You know, I like how frozen the song after kind of gets in and gets out. It's just, you know, it doesn't linger very long, and it's a great counterpoint to the first two tracks because it's relatively brief. And I like that they can do that too. They can still like, you know, kind of punch you in the face and then leave the room, and then go into something acoustic, you know, kind of, you know, shifting, you know, the tension here. And so I really like that moment there in the album where they kind of like, oh, pow, and then pull it back again. In the Cold Winds of Nowhere, first of all, one of my favorite titles on I love that. I love it. You know, it creates like an image in my head. It's such a cool line. I really love that, the name of the song. And, you know, about, you know, 45 to 50 seconds into like 110, there's this super killer riff, man. That's like this kind of string skipping riff that he's doing. It gets me every time. It's really cool. If you haven't really paid attention to it, highly recommend it. So it's within like that first, you know, minute and a half of.
It's like a marching kind of. There's like a march to that song. The way it starts off, it's very epic, and I
yeah,
dig
man,
it.
it's something really special there. You know, and then, you know, he kind of does that whisper in the cold winds of nowhere. You know,
Yeah.
It's a really killer song.
Nice touch.
Yeah, definitely. The Grief Prophecy, Shadows Over a Lost Kingdom, like, you know, super long title. And I was kind of like, you know, why is this, why does this have like basically 2 sentences for a song title? But then you listen to it and it's kind of like, well, the first half, it's kind of like an instrumental, really, that they kind of, because he doesn't really start, the vocals didn't really hit until like 1 minute and 40 seconds into the song. So, you know, it gets better there. You know, and then, you know, I think there's a lot of death metal going on here. This one's probably just like this, the track that's kind of okay for me. I wish that it got to the point a little bit quicker. You know what I mean? I wish it didn't take almost 2 minutes to get to the verse vocals on it. But that's a minor gripe. I still like the song. You know, to Kellen's point, there are no poor tracks on this record. You know what I mean? Just some, and for me, I like them all, but some more than others. Mistress of Bleeding Sorrow, man, is just absolutely excellent. You know, that's probably, you know, my third favorite song on the record, maybe fourth. Heaven's Damnation's pretty high up there for me, but I love that crazy doominess going on here. Kellen, you said it, Catatonia. That's a great call out, but definitely reminiscent of that. You know, I guess we can argue over who did it first. I don't know. Yeah. But regardless, just super cool. And even when, like, you know, the more death metal type riffs come in around 3.5 to 4 minutes, like it doesn't lose its effect. Speaking of effect, there's a weird effect on the guitar solo though that I really like at about 4:15 in it. I don't know what's going on there, but I like it. I don't know what they're doing, but it's a cool. I need to keep listening to that, try to figure out what's going on there. But it's a nice, to Marty's, I'll use Marty's phrase here, a nice touch. And, you know, and then they go out with a classical guitar again, and I think that's okay. You know what I mean? You know, there's several classical guitar interludes on this. Obviously, Jon and company have a huge, you know, classical influence. So on this record, for its tone, for you know, the world that it's building, it makes perfect sense to go out like that. So yeah, no bad tracks on this one for me, but definitely highlights are, you know, the first two, Heaven's Damnation and Mistress of the Bleeding Sorrow.
Yeah, this is track for track. It's really a great album. Nothing really complained. Black Horizon, I mean, lead off track, it's stunning how perfectly composed this song is. Kind of demonstrates the elevated twin guitar lines and triumphant melodies. You're going to get that throughout this entire album. So it's a very mature songwriting, which, you know, you got the classic acoustic guitar that comes in, and a lot of very captivating twists and turns in the tempo and in the feel of the track. You'll find on a lot of these tracks, you know, Kellen mentioned earlier that the middle parts of a lot of these songs, they kind of tend to go slower and more mid-pace, and they really start building the guitar lines. The vocals kind of fall away, but this is where you get your solos coming in, and these twin lead lines that just offer so much character to this album. Somberlain is very much in line with Black Horizon, another epic track. Again, I love the layered guitar lines on this one. And there's this enchanting melody towards the middle of the track that comes in. It's just great. These little subtle things that they throw in here that you maybe won't get the first time through, but multiple listens, like, oh, I never really heard how good that melody line is before. But there's a lot of melody coming at you. A lot of riff changes and tempo stuff coming on that you don't see coming, because you kind of get pulled along in these tracks. You're just kind of floating along with the atmosphere. Yeah, a lot of mystery in this one. Endless hooks. It really kind of keeps it full of wonder for me. Another favorite I mentioned earlier, I love Heaven's Damnation. There's a simplicity in some of these riffs on this one, and it sounds like a bit more of a typical song for their area, their location. It sounds, but yet they kind of lean into the black metal side a little bit more, the speed. And there's like these tremolo melody lines that come in that really stand out, kind of sell the track for me. And again, the middle of the track goes off into a layered melody line and slower tempo for dynamic building. There's even a bit of a mild rock swagger veiled in blackened dissonance towards the end before they kind of explode back into that headbanging speed. Great song. It's got some simplicity to it, but I think it works. It kind of gives you, what is that, track 5? Yeah, but at that point, it kind of gives you a bit of a breather. In the Cold Winds of Nowhere is another favorite. And, Jim said that just the title alone kind of paints this mental picture, this world you're standing in. Then he's whispering, Cold Winds of Nowhere. And I love the opening riffs of the song. There's like a march to it. And the way that the riff is broke up, it like feels like it's going to get more simplistic, but they throws in like this more complex melody thing at the end of it. It's like, wow, exciting riffs. Very good shit. Grief Prophecy, one of the heavier tracks on the album. The whole album is great. I think it's one of those, they perfected it a bit on the next one, but yeah, it stands out. There's really not much wrong with this one. Judgment, final thoughts. Kellen.
I mean, maybe not up to the follow-up, but I think just as worthy and probably mandatory for the style. If you don't listen to this and you were to only listen to Storm, you'd be missing out on potentially some of the best tracks that the band ever put out. And I think you'd be at a loss. So absolutely, if you're into this kind of Swedish extreme metal, check it out. It's a classic. And I think we kind of wanted to, I would imagine, to Jim's point, Logan's here in the chat talking about sort of it lives in the shadow of its, the follow-up. This is also worthy of your time and such a killer record from a really unique sound in extreme metal's history.
All right, Jim, you obviously picked it.
So yeah,
would you buy it?
I would, and I have, and I would again.
Multiple times. Yes.
Yeah. As I said at the beginning of the night, neither of the first two Dissection albums will ever leave my constant rotation. There's something about the makeup of these tracks, of these songs, from the riff all the way up to the overall effect of the records, that I've never been able to distance myself or even wanted to. Like I love living in that world once I hit play on those. For the first time I heard, Where Dead Angels Lie and onwards, like, these records have always just, really, cut me to my core with what metal can be. I think they really, opened up a new world, or maybe a better way to put it is they created a bridge between, melodic black metal, melodic death metal, and they brought those two worlds together in such a perfect fusion that, from my mind, no one else has been able to top. So I absolutely think that these albums both. Everyone, we all talk about Storm the Light Spain, but I think that Somberlain is just as critical. It's just as essential.
Yeah.
It is an absolutely perfect record. If Storm is an 11 out of 10, this is a 10 out of 10. And maybe on some days it's an 11 out of 10 too. I honestly, depending on what day you could ask me, I could say I like the Somberlain better. There's something about this record that on certain days, this is just the one I want to hear, so I love them both equally. And I absolutely think that, if melodic black metal, melodic death metal is your thing, you've already heard these records. And if you haven't, change that. And if it's been a long time, change that too, because it's time to get back into that purple void.
Yeah, for me, this is a very special time. And, Somberlain and Storm of the Light Spain, they're great complement records to each other. I'm not unhappy with either one that hits the stereo. They're just a special moment in time. They've got that feeling. They've got that warmth. They've got that atmosphere. And I like the fact that it isn't just a straight up black metal album or a straight up death metal album. It is ambiguous as to what it's classified as, and it just makes it more captivating. Not, I don't need to have a title to enjoy an album. I'm just saying it borrows from so many different ideas and influences. It makes an awesome melodically charged dark metal piece of history. It's history. And it's really unfortunate that the guy did what he did and wrote such a crappy record for his comeback, but can't take these two away from us. And the Somberlain is definitely 10 out of 10 record. 9.5 out of 10 maybe. I think the production got a little bit better on the next one, but they're so close. It doesn't matter. So yeah, great pick, Jim. It was good I haven't spun this in a hot minute, so it was cool to spend some quality time with it this past week. And Logan is picking for next week, and he's in the chat to tell us all what it is going to be. So there's like a 9-second lag in me saying this. So go ahead, Logan, share with us what you are going to unleash upon us next week. Here we go. Great pick from Jim, and from the shadows, I'm picking Convulse, World Without God. Excited to discuss Finnish death metal next week. So there it is. Convulse, World Without God will be next week. Some show notes before we get to what these guys have going on. It's been a busy week so far. Monday, we had Alan did a review for the new Paradise Lost and the new Feytooth album. Yesterday, we posted a review that Dreadful Rick and Logan did together for the new Castle Rat album, and I can't remember the name of that band. Margarita Witch Cult. Yeah, Margarita Witch Cult. It's like a 40-minute long review. Check it out. They go deep on Castle Rat. And Friday, we don't know yet. It's been up to me, and I've been busy. So we'll be here Friday. Rest assured. But let's go over to this corner of the cosmos. What do you got going on? Anything you want to?
Yeah. So I'll be gone next week over in Virginia, getting ready for my race. If everything goes well, by the time in the middle of Heavy Metallurgy Friday, I should be finished to sit down to watch the closing moments of Friday Heavy Metallurgy next week. So,
well, we worry about you and we're proud of you. Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck in your travels.
Yeah. And then after that, I'll have more time for fun metal YouTube stuff, but that's just on my schedule right now.
All right. Jim, how about you? What's going on?
Not much. It's been pretty quiet. The bands I was working with, so I guess they're all doing stuff to prep for. So I haven't heard so nothing to report there. But I have been getting some orders lately, and I know it's you metal chat guys in the chat for Metallurgy. So thank you for being supportive of the label and of the distro and buying stuff and making it worth my time to do it. So just want to say thanks to everybody. So.
Yep. And if you're curious about Iowa's recordings, link is in the description. Go over and see the stuff that he has put out. Some very cool, a nice diverse cast of bands. It isn't just one thing. There's There's stuff going on over there. It's awesome. So go check them out. All right. Next week, World Without God by Convulse. And we will see you here Friday. And you'll see these guys next week. Well, you won't see Kellen. But take care, everybody. Thanks a lot. It was good to have you in the chat. Go check out the Metallurgy Discord server. If you like the chat, you're going to have a lot of the same people talking about metal all week long. Link in the description. We will see you Friday.